have to say, I have a lot of memories of Diane. I guess I feel as though I've known you my whole life. You're a great artist. I remember it and I love it, and I love you.
And endlessly inspiring. I'll hold that memory and her in my heart always. People often say, real love never fades, it simply changes form. In the shimmering world of old Hollywood, some tales remain hidden until the final act is over. The air carried those words like a quiet confession, not scripted, but spoken straight from the soul of one of film's most mysterious legends. After years of silence, Al Pacino finally opened up about the woman who had shared both his art and his life. But these weren't the polished lines of publicity. They were confessions wrapped in truth. Beneath the glow of The Godfather existed a world of tension and devotion, where fame and love intertwined in a play neither could ever quite end. On October 11th, 2025, Hollywood dimmed its lights for one of its most luminous icons. Diane Keaton left this world in California at 79. Her family announced the loss through People magazine, and in moments, tributes poured in from across the globe. The New York Times called her a symbol of intelligence, grace, and independence in American film. Vanity Fair added its own quiet praise. Diane Keaton was more than an actress. She was the defining spirit of a generation. Those simple words marked the end of nearly 60 years of work from a woman who reshaped what it meant to be female on screen. Her family held no public service, keeping the farewell private, just as Diane had lived her later years. That day, social feeds filled with black and white stills from Annie Hall and The Godfather, two films that forever tied her name to greatness. "Whenever Diane's in a movie, you know it's worth watching," wrote Martin Scorsese in a moving reflection. While friends and fans mourned, one voice echoed above the rest. In a public statement, Al Pacino said, "I loved her. She was the heart of Michael Corleone's world." But these weren't his only words. Before she passed, Al had written about emotions he'd kept buried for a lifetime. In his memoir, released only months earlier, he wrote, "We found a rhythm that felt true." Another passage, often repeated by the press, read, "She carried me through my ruins when I couldn't stand on my own." To many, that was Al's final love letter to Diane. Simple, quiet, and real. Publications revisited their story with a tone of reverence. The New Yorker described them as the mirrored halves of classic Hollywood, her lightness balancing his intensity. Diane's passing gave Al's words a haunting depth. They sounded less like nostalgia and more like a late confession of love never forgotten. A longtime friend told People that Diane lived with honesty, never pretending to be more than she was. The quote captured her truth perfectly. Diane herself had once said, "Perfection never interested me. Authenticity did." Amid Hollywood's illusions, that raw honesty made her truly irreplaceable. As tributes spread, young actors shared her smile from Something's Gotta Give with the caption, "She made aging fearless." Even in her late 70s, Diane remained active, starring in Book Club: The Next Chapter, a role she said would be her last. Around the same time, Al Pacino withdrew from the spotlight. At 85, he appeared frail, granting only brief interviews. When asked about Diane not long before her death, he replied softly, "She was one of a kind. No one could take her place." That line became his quiet goodbye before the world lost her. Soon, old interviews and photos of the two resurfaced, reminding everyone of the rare bond they shared. To understand it, one must go back to where it began, in East Harlem, in a little place called Patsy's, where the Godfather cast first gathered and fate introduced two strangers destined to shape each other's lives. In the early 70s, Hollywood was shifting toward realism, leaving behind the gloss of the studio age. Within that change, The Godfather took shape. A young Francis Coppola, still in his 30s, insisted on casting Al Pacino as Michael Corleone, despite fierce pushback from Paramount. "I saw something in him, a quiet danger that unsettled everyone," Coppola noted in his production journal. The studio wanted a taller, more famous actor, but Coppola refused to budge. For Kay Adams, he chose Diane Keaton, a Broadway newcomer with a disarming presence. "She didn't look like she belonged in that world," Coppola wrote. "That's what made her perfect." Diane, then in her early 20s, had no idea that this one audition would rewrite her destiny. "I still remember meeting Al for the first time," she said later. "It was in a dim bar reading lines for The Godfather. The moment was tense. Two young actors, shy and uncertain, rehearsing love under fluorescent lights. Diane recalled that Al barely spoke, only looked at her through a haze of smoke, and somehow that silence drew her in."
Coppola later said, "Her audition was a scene I couldn't refuse. He knew instantly she was Kay, the only soul who could make Michael Corleone feel human." The studio still doubted him. The New York Times reported that executives demanded a more recognizable face, but Coppola risked his career to keep both actors. It was a decision that would alter film history and their lives forever. In the early spring of 1971, production kicked off in New York City. The first scene, featuring Al and Diane, took place during Connie Corleone's wedding, marking their debut together on film. Over the next 8 months, a quiet unease lingered across the set. Al kept mostly to himself, speaking only with Coppa, while Diane's warmth and humor became the only bridge between him and the rest of the crew. One member remembered, "She was the one who finally made Al smile after weeks of silence." That moment slowly sparked an unspoken connection between them. The Godfather wrapped in August and premiered the following spring. When it hit theaters, the film reshaped the world of cinema. Al emerged as the new embodiment of the stoic anti-hero, and Diane mesmerized audiences with Kay's calm strength and vulnerability. A reviewer for the Los Angeles Times noted, "Their performances feel so genuine, the audience forgets they're acting." As the film's promotion unfolded, Diane and Al began appearing together more frequently, though they remained silent about their relationship. Diane later mentioned that after the premiere, Al asked her to dinner at a quiet Central Park restaurant, their first real conversation. "He wasn't like anyone else I'd known," she said later. "He wasn't trying to impress me. He was just himself." The triumph of The Godfather transformed both their careers. The film not only reinvented the crime genre, but also placed them among the brightest stars of 1970s American cinema. Al earned an Oscar nod, while Diane became a top choice for the decade's emerging filmmakers. After The Godfather, their fame soared beyond expectation, yet a delicate bond tied them together off-screen. Stardom brought both admiration and isolation, a spotlight that exposed the spaces between their public success and private longing. Slowly, their connection began to evolve, shaped by fame and the quiet distance between their hearts. Following the triumph of The Godfather Part 2, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino's friendship deepened into romance. They were often seen together at premieres and Paramount gatherings, yet both preferred to protect their personal lives from public intrusion. In a rare confession, Diane once said, "He was the love of my life, but we were complicated." A few words, but they captured everything. Her, open and expressive; he, inward and reserved. Diane's stardom soon reached new heights. In 1977, Annie Hall debuted, instantly becoming a cultural touchstone. Her performance earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress. Her effortless charm, natural grace, and wit made her the emblem of a new kind of woman on screen, free, modern, and unapologetically herself. The press hailed her as the spirit of a generation, authentic yet grounded. She spoke fearlessly about women's independence and rejected the notion that success must mirror a man's image. Meanwhile, Al Pacino reached his own artistic peak. Dog Day Afternoon turned him into the face of raw rebellion, while Scarface cemented his legacy as one of cinema's most volatile and magnetic performers. One critic called him the mirror of post-war America, lost, proud, and burning with defiance. When asked about Diane, Al simply said, "We have our own rhythm." Their closeness thrived on shared artistic energy. Even amid fame's chaos, they nurtured their connection quietly. Diane often attended his rehearsals, slipping backstage without fanfare. Friends described them as two kindred souls, talking endlessly about film, theater, and life's smallest details. Yet as their paths diverged, so did their ways of coping with fame. Diane embraced openness and conversation, while Al retreated into privacy. Their meetings became rarer, their bond more fragile. Diane leaned toward independent projects, and Al immersed himself in studio productions. They reunited briefly on Reds, where Diane worked alongside Warren Beatty. Rumors swirled that Al grew jealous, but Diane brushed them aside. "We're friends. That's enough." By the late 80s, differences in ambition and rhythm quietly pulled them apart. Diane spent much of her time in Los Angeles, dedicating herself to theater and reflecting on her next chapter behind the camera. Mostly based in New York, Al devoted himself to the theater scene, rarely making public appearances. They would cross paths at grand occasions, festivals, premieres, or backstage at talk shows. Yet in interviews, both skillfully avoided any mention of personal matters. What lingered between them was mutual regard and quiet understanding. They both realized their connection hadn't faded from lack of affection, but because fame had separated their worlds. As time went on, Diane and Al continued to drift within each other's orbits, like two stars that never collided. Eventually, destiny brought them face to face again. When Francis Ford Coppola set out to create The Godfather Part 3, he sought to reunite his original cast to complete the 20-year saga. Both Diane Keaton and Al Pacino agreed to return, despite the years that had passed since their breakup. Production started in late 1989 in Rome, later shifting to New York City for indoor scenes. On set, Diane stayed upbeat and gracious with the crew. While everything remained calm, the two barely exchanged personal words, yet their performances flowed effortlessly together. Diane later admitted the reunion carried its own weight. The difficulties, she explained, reflected not just Michael and Kay's relationship, but their real-life history. Around that period, Al Pacino was dealing with personal upheaval. He had a child with a former partner, a revelation that struck Diane deeply.
They continued some contact, though their closeness faded once the news surfaced. In one interview, Al quietly reflected, "Our goodbye felt like art imitating life, a rare moment when fiction and truth became one." In her memoir, Diane was more direct. "I told him if marriage wasn't in his plans, I was leaving, and I did." It wasn't a rash move, but the result of years spent waiting for a promise that never arrived. That single decision ended nearly 2 decades of entangled lives, one longing for certainty, the other fearing it. Francis Ford Coppola once recalled that while filming Michael and Kay's final scene, silence filled the set. They didn't need lines, their eyes said everything. The look they shared made many believe their feelings had never fully disappeared. But Coppola knew that gaze was their real farewell. When production ended in mid-1990, they went their own directions. Diane moved toward family life, while Al buried himself in his craft, carrying unspoken scars. After The Godfather Part 3, Diane Keaton stepped back from emotionally draining roles, seeking more peace in her life. She adopted 2 children, Dexter in 1996 and Duke in 2001. In later interviews, she often said, "Becoming a mother taught me what love truly is." For her, motherhood wasn't about replacing lost love, but rebuilding her heart from within. In the years that followed, Diane starred in films portraying mature, witty, and introspective women. Marvin's Room earned her another Oscar nod, while Something's Gotta Give reintroduced her as the emblem of self-aware resilience. Movies like The Family Stone, Because I Said So, and Book Club proved that even in her 60s, her magnetic charm endured. Many critics observed that Diane built a career without competition or chaos, defined instead by longevity and grace. Al Pacino, meanwhile, entered the 1990s at a creative high point. Scent of a Woman earned him his long-awaited Oscar, cementing his legacy as one of cinema's greats. He continued with Heat, The Insider, The Devil's Advocate, and more, adapting effortlessly to Hollywood's changing landscape. Yet despite the accolades, his private world stayed quiet. Al fathered 3 children, twins, Anton and Olivia with Beverly D'Angelo, and a son, Roman, with Noor Alfallah. Though surrounded by love, he never married. In a rare conversation, Al remarked, "I never walked into marriage, but I've known what love feels like." The quote became a lasting summary of his story, a man fulfilled by art, yet haunted by solitude. In 2024, Al Pacino released his memoir, Sonny Boy, which critics called an unfiltered portrait of a man shaped by both glory and loss. He revisited his poor Bronx upbringing, the struggles of early stage life, the meteoric rise to fame, and the emptiness that trailed behind success. In several chapters, he devoted touching passages to Diane Keaton, the only person written with genuine tenderness. "He pulled me out of financial ruin by urging me to do Sea of Love," he revealed. Few knew that after the flop of Revolution in the late 80s, Al had nearly gone broke. Diane's persuasion not only revived his career, but also his confidence. In another excerpt, he confessed, "We got drunk after shooting The Godfather, and I realized then I'd never meet another like her." Though they never disclosed the exact moment, those words revealed that Diane had become an indelible part of his memory. Sonny Boy, published by Penguin Press, quickly became one of 2024's most discussed books in the film world. Critics hailed it as raw and deeply humane. More than a career reflection, it was a man confronting loss with honesty. Many agreed that the section about Diane was the memoir's emotional center. Al's quiet admission that some things in life had simply drifted too far. Diane and Al stayed close friends, occasionally seen together at AFI tributes. In 2024, as Diane received her Lifetime Achievement Award, Al rose from the front row, applauding her with visible pride as she stepped into the spotlight. When questioned about what they shared, he only replied, "She changed how I understand love." After that evening, the two were never seen together again. A year later, Diane Keaton quietly passed away in her California home. As tributes poured in, Sonny Boy reappeared, not as a goodbye from her, but as a message from the one who stayed behind. The words written for Diane spread everywhere, carrying the weight of a farewell he had never spoken aloud. Together, Diane Keaton and Al Pacino left more than unforgettable roles. They left a mark that forever altered how audiences viewed humanity on screen. Diane reshaped what it meant to be a woman in film. Bold yet tender, humorous yet profound, always real in every phase of her life. She showed the world that love didn't require conformity, that truth itself could make a woman the heart of the story. Her style, from those signature hats to her sharp, distinct voice, transcended fashion and became a symbol of individuality and freedom. Pacino, with that quiet intensity and voice full of gravity, portrayed flawed heroes, raw and deeply human. He proved that true performance lives in silence,
in the depth of a glance rather than in dialogue. Every role he took peeled back another truth about being human: pride, fragility, desire, and loneliness. From The Godfather to Annie Hall, from the brilliance of youth to the serenity of age, they linger in the audience's hearts. Their bond needed no promises, no labels. It simply existed, like a faint light flickering between Michael and Kay's final gaze. In the end, perhaps Al's only confession was this: some loves escape definition, some connections defy naming, and often the most powerful love stories are the ones that never find an ending. If the story of Diane Keaton and Al Pacino made you reflect on love, loss, and connection, share your thoughts below. And be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more stories where cinema meets the soul.